I want to talk to you about tax reform, but before that, we have to talk a little bit about this incident that was reported late yesterday. Reportedly, that the president at least urged then director of the FBI, Comey, to back off the Flynn investigation. How much does that disrupt what we would call the Trump agenda up here on Capitol Hill?
Well, it certainly turns the media topic of the day away from the things that we want to talk about, health care and tax, but we have to address it, But knowing this president the way I know him and seeing how he's operated over the last 4 months, it'd be hard for me to believe that this thing's going to be substantiated. So we'll see how it turns out. But I'm anxious to get past all of this week and move on to the agenda that people in America really want us to focus on.
Well, and as you suggest, there may be nothing to this ultimately, but how do we get to the point where we know there's nothing to it? I mean, who can investigate this as well? I mean, how do you feel about things like a special counsel or a select committee? Do we need that just to get it behind us?
Well, so far, the select committee we have is an intelligence committee in the Senate, and they've been investigating the Russia thing. They'll look into these allegations as well. And so far, they're doing their job, and I have full confidence they'll get to the bottom of all of this.
So your Senate committee will investigate this most recent allegation?
Well, that hadn't been confirmed today, but if it continues, I feel sure they'll include it in all of the investigation regarding Russia.
I saw there's a call from Congressman Chaffetz right now for the FBI to turn over whatever memoranda that may or may not exist from Director Comey. Do you support that? I do,
but I don't. Look, we'll see what happens in this, but as we saw earlier in the week, those unsubstantiated reports were actually reversed relative to what McMaster said and what Tillerson said, who were in the room in that conversation.
So let's get back to what was at least the agenda of tax reform. You've been outspoken on tax reform and the need for tax reform, but a need of a particular sort. We've had on Majority Leader Mitch McConnell yesterday, the day before that, Kevin Brady, talking about what needs to be done. Let's start with exactly what they agreed on. Number one, it needs to be revenue neutral so it can be permanent. Right. And you must appreciate this because what Kevin Brady said is, for a businessman, you need to invest.
Well, there's no question we have to invest. This economy is really about to turn. But what the border adjustment tax does is the reason they're talking about that is to so-called pay for these cuts. But let's focus on what we're really trying to do. The corporate tax rate, the repatriation tax, they need to be adjusted so we can compete with the rest of the world. The president's agenda is also adjust and simplify the individual tax reform. And all three of those are growth oriented.
So I bet if you don't have a border adjustment tax, which you have said very publicly you are against, can you pay for the sort of level of cuts, like going down to 15% for the corporate rate?
Well, two things. Number one, the only reason you have to, quote, pay for it is because of the archaic 10-year rule we have here in the Senate and Congress. But what we haven't talked about is potential spending cuts, tax expenditure revisions that nobody's talked about yet, and then really the ultimate long-term impact of growth in this economy. In other words, if you just allow 10 years and look at it, the growth that will come from these tax changes will be much longer lived than that.
So are you in favor of dynamic scoring and trying to figure out whether
it's necessary? Of course, absolutely. But again, even that model may not fully represent the full benefit over the long term. If you look at the capital assets that we're buying right now, some of these have 30, 40, 50-year lives, right? But we only look at 10 years. On the reverse of that, we do a 10-year budget, which means that you can spend money now if you promise to save it in year 10. Well, that rarely happens up here.
So let me take advantage of your experience as a CEO. We had Dave Cote, who ran Honeywell, very successful for many years, on recently. And he said he never made a decision about capital investment based on tax rates.
Of course not.
So that doesn't really generate more investment, does it?
No, it absolutely does. Because what happens, right, we've got about $6 trillion not at work in this economy right now. The largest liquidity position, I believe, in the Russell 1000's history. We've got $2 trillion stuck on the balance sheets of small banks because of Dodd-Frank. And we've got somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion stuck overseas in unrepatriated. I was a CEO. I had profits stuck overseas. And I know when I wanted to build assets, some of those decisions were made based on where I could deploy that money. Today, with low interest rates, it makes it easier not to do that. But we're headed back to a more normalized interest rate environment, I believe.
But was that the constraint on capital investment for you as a CEO, or was it a failure to see clearly increased demand in the future? Because you only invest in capital equipment if you think you're going to have a demand that you can profit from.
Well, that's right, but you have opportunities across the globe now. And so what happens here in the M&A environment particularly, it makes our companies very vulnerable to someone who can come in and acquire a U.S. company and use the tax chain or the tax arbitrage between their country and our country to actually pay for the deal. And that's happened numerous times here in the last decade.
Can you get the sort of fundamental tax reform you want without some Democratic support of some sort?
Absolutely. I mean, I really believe that. I just think this border adjustment tax is a regressive tax that hammers low-income, middle-income consumers. More importantly, though, we saw what happened in Europe when they put a consumption tax on top of an income tax. Central governments grew by 2/3 over there. In the last two presidencies here, David. This government in the United States has grown from $2.4 trillion to $3.9 trillion. We've already been through that explosion in the size of government.
So finally, give us a timetable. We heard from Congressman Brady by the end of the year.
Yeah.
We heard from Mitch McConnell by the end of the Congress.
You know, I really hope we can get it done by the end of the year. 2 months ago, we were talking about trying to get it done before August. And now we're trying to get health care done before August. My view is that nobody should go back to their home states and work in August until we get tax done. We should stay here and focus on that.